This is Beer in Front. Every week I'll talk about a beer that maybe we've forgotten along the way while we get those check-ins and badges. Being the Chicago beer guy, I'll also talk about great craft beer in the city of Chicago. That's Beer in Front, and it's coming up now. Welcome to the Father's Day edition of Beer in Front. I'm your host, the Reverend Dave Zalatoris, and I thank everyone for listening. This week's show is going to be a killer show. I have good friends of mine that are participating. They've sent in some clips, and they're talking about beers that their fathers or mothers drank. It was fun listening to these. I'm sure you're going to enjoy them. Listening to people, reminisce about their dad. I'm going to talk about my dad beer a little later. My father was a big Stroh's guy, and I finally found it. So when I found the beer, it was about a month ago, and this idea just came. Oh, wow, let's do a Father's Day edition. So kind of last minute, but people pitched in and recorded a clip about beers that, their fathers had. So I really thank everyone. This should be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed putting this together. My dad died back in 95. And, it was weird just thinking, I just had a birthday a couple weeks ago. And, I was thinking that my father has now been dead more than half of my life. And it's just weird. We had a weird relationship where, we loved each other. There was no denying that. But towards the end, we didn't have a lot in common and we didn't communicate all that much. And, that's something that God knows I've been to enough therapy. I don't know. I'm sure a lot of it's my fault. I kind of beat myself up over that a lot. But we both weren't the biggest of communicators. And like I said, we didn't have a lot in common, but, I loved my dad. He was a great guy. I know he loved me. My dad got sick early in 95. He had a really bad stroke and he passed away 3 months later. And, during that time, I went to the hospital every day to see him, and, he was in intensive care. Sometimes they moved him to a nursing home and then, back into intensive care. And, we really couldn't talk because obviously, he couldn't. But, towards the end, I saw him every day. I'd pick up my grandmother who, has since passed, but, I'd pick her up. We'd go to the hospital, we'd see my dad, or even on my days off, I would just run over there and, see him in the hospital. So, those last 3 months that every day, I talked to him, he listened. Sometimes he was awake, sometimes he wasn't. But, I always told him, Dad, I love you. And, he, nodded his head, that he loved me too. And I remember the last time I saw him, and it was a Sunday, and it was the weekend before Mother's Day. And, I went to the place where he was at, and he was sitting up in a chair, and I was blown away. I'm like, what the hell is this? I mean, my dad has literally been in a bed with tubes for 3 months, and he was sitting up in a chair, and he was lucid. We were having a conversation, and, he was like, I know Mother's Day's coming up. Can you do me a favor and get a card so he would give to his mother, which is my grandmother? I'm like, yeah, sure, Dad. And it was just, it just really boggled my mind because, like I said, my dad didn't communicate. He had this stroke. So the fact that we were speaking and, it really was kind of bizarre. And he was like, my birthday's May 30th. So he was like, and I know you have a birthday coming up. I don't want you to think I forgot about you. I'm like, Dad, trust me, don't worry about my birthday. The fact that, he made such a tremendous progress in like a couple days was stunning. And 2 days later, he died. And so I guess, like, I don't know, he worked up whatever strength he had, for that last visit. But, I remember, when I left that, we both told each other that we loved each other. So, I know my last words to my dad were, "I love you." And he said that to me. So I know he's gone. I miss him. I wish I was a better son towards the end, but I feel good knowing that when he died, he knew I loved him. And I know my dad loved me. So, Dad, happy Father's Day. This show's for you, buddy.
We already know you got great taste in podcasts because you're listening to this one, so here's another recommendation for you. Have you ever wondered the inspiration behind board games like Outburst and Taboo? Or maybe you have a fascination with the supernatural, like how come ghosts never have feet? Maybe you want to know what it's like to work as a wig master on Broadway. We're figuring out the answers to all of these and so much more on Good People Cool Things, hosted by me, Joey Held, a writer, podcaster, and guy with a soothing voice. And as a bonus, every episode ends with a corny joke. Listen at goodpeoplecoolthings.com or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back. I'm happy to have on my good friend from Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, Floyd Freeman. You've heard me talk about the beers he sent over in the past couple of weeks. I've been enjoying those along with the pretzels. Floyd, thanks so much for coming on, brother. How you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks, Dave. I'm happy to be here, man. I hope you enjoyed the beers and the pretzels, and I'm always happy to send that stuff out.
Yeah, it's funny, too, because every time I was having the pretzels, like my dog was looking at me like, "Dude, a little taste?" And I'm like, "Oh, wait, these have hops in it. I can't give it to you."
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that, how hops are poisonous to dogs.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, though, that they do that. I was like, they're putting hops in these pretzels, and they're delicious. I mean, at least I thought they were.
Oh, yeah, those are outstanding.
And that's like a staple here in PA, man. It's always beer and pretzels, whether they're soft pretzels or hard pretzels. There's an abundance of those here.
What, like in your area, is there like a predominant one? Is it more soft pretzels, more hard? I mean, they're both great.
Yeah, so there's different styles of soft pretzels. Like in Philly, they're almost shaped like a figure eight, almost like a squared off figure eight almost. They're round at the ends, but here we even have we have a lot of Amish pretzels too, which are your typical pretzel shape. They're like more buttery, but then also down in Hanover, it's called like the snack food capital of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And Utz is there, Snyder's of Hanover. They're based there. I know Snyder's has factories like all over the country now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different styles. The hard pretzels seem to be more dominant here.
Okay.
Philly seems to be more soft pretzels. Like you go to a gas station and there's soft pretzels sitting at the register, and it's like your breakfast right there. You go in, buy your coffee, grab a pretzel off the counter, and that's your breakfast.
Yeah, I'm trying. A breakfast pretzel might be good. A little bacon on that.
I've done it. When I lived down there, I would do it. Pretzels and pretzels for breakfast.
When we first started talking, you mentioned your old man was a big Youngling drinker, and I haven't had one in years, and you were kind enough to send me some. What is it about your father and Youngling that you remember?
So Yuengling has always been...
Yuengling, all right. I'm sorry. I messed that up. Yuengling.
Good, man. They've just been big around here. It's up in Pottsville, which is a little over an hour north of us. I've done the tour there one time. It's just interesting because it's just such an old facility. They've been around since 1829. It's a cheap beer, but they're classified as craft, which there's discussion about that, whether they really are or not. It's just always been around. And so the lager, I believe, started in the 80s, like mid or later 80s, which kind of saved the brand because they were pretty much bankrupt. with their, their premium beer and their black and tan, their porter. The lager really kind of saved that company, but it's just a staple around here. Like when you go to the bar and you simply ask for a lager, you're getting a Yuengling lager.
Okay.
What I remember as a kid, the Yuengling Premium, which I'm drinking in a can now, they used to come in 16-ounce returnable bottles. So I just always remember the dads, the grandpas, the grandmothers, the moms, whatever, whoever's drinking it, you'd always see it, the empty case sitting in the garage with the empties in it because they were returnables. So, hey, you'd see, hey, your dad's got a half case of beer left because you could see that, 12 are in there. But that's how I remember it. I don't know if their premium is as popular as it was now that lager kind of took over. The Yuengling lager is by far their most popular brand or most popular beer, which I know I've drank my share of it. I haven't had this premium in a long time. It looks like your typical light Pilsner. Got that malty. You just smell the sweet malts in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty crisp and clean. Like it's something I could definitely. A lawnmower beer comes to mind. I've grabbed a case of it and I could definitely see myself drinking these. After mowing the lawn. I think this is more of a beer I need to drink in a social setting. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but beers go down easier. For me in a social setting where I'm not thinking about it as much because it's not exactly something I would grab, want to drink every night.
Yeah, in a social setting, you're going to be talking for a long time. You'd probably want to have something like that as opposed to 8 or 9% double IPA.
Right.
At least you could have a few more of them
in the summer.
Yeah. Today here.
It's good. And especially like in this situation, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, here in Chicago today, it's like 96 degrees out. So yeah, that'd be perfect to sit outside. You're cooking on the grill, doing something, you could pound down a couple of those, you'd be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's beer. Like it tastes like a beer. It's what I remember is like, it's like when your dad lets you try the first sip of beer, it kind of tastes like that in a way. But now that I can actually drink beer, I'm enjoying it. As back as a kid, when you get to try it, you're like, that's the most horrible thing you've ever tasted in your life.
Like, what? Yeah, what is this shit? Yeah.
But yeah, this is the first I've had since I grabbed the case, and like I said, I can see myself throwing some of these back this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like like that. And like, would you still say that's the most popular beer in your area? Like, obviously outside of is that more popular than like a Budweiser or Miller or Coors?
I would have to say Bud Light and Miller Lite are huge here. Mm-hmm. I think that the premium beer you never see people drink this anymore.
Okay.
But I never see anybody drink this anymore. If you see Yuengling, it's typically the lager.
All right.
It's very rare that I see premium on draft. I was even like at the grocery store, like at Wegmans, the grocery store by me, and they didn't have premium. Like I had to go to the beer distributor right next. I mean, I'm a minute from this beer distributor, but I had to go there. PA, we have the beer distributors where up until not too long ago, you had to buy a case. You weren't even able to buy 6-packs or anything, but they didn't have Yuengling in anything but a case.
Oh, okay.
So I had to buy a case of it, but it was cheaper than most 4-packs of beer are now.
Yeah. Better than, 4-pack of Lagunitas or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting. Like, so my son's 10 and I've been dragging him to Vermont since he was less than 2. Like he was under 2. He's a toddler when we would go up there. And the Alchemist, like Heady Topper, because that was the thing we were chasing back then. Which I still love that beer. Like it's still one of my favorite beers, all-time favorite beers. But it's funny to think of him in 30 years doing this. Is he going to he'd be drinking a Heady Topper right now if he was talking about his old man's beers. But the marketing, like the labels and everything, were some of the first things that he recognized as a kid. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, but he just recognized like the Heady Topper can, like he knew that logo and everything. So it's just funny how things have changed.
Yeah.
And of course, my dad, like the first time I gave him a Heady Topper, he's like, "Oh, it's that beer. It tastes like dirt." And like he just like IPAs and stuff. He can't. He claims he doesn't like them, but I've never seen anybody slam a Heady Topper faster than him.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, maybe he just wants to get rid of it. Yeah.
Well, he'd be feeling it too because of drinking these light beers and then chugging a 16-ounce can of 8% beer. He's definitely going to feel it.
Yeah. Well, Floyd, I thanks so much for coming on, talking about your old man and Yuengling. Once again, I need to thank you again for sending me all the great stuff from Pizza. Was it Pizza Ports or Pizza Boy?
Yeah, Pizza Boy.
Pizza Boy, the other ones, the pretzels. I can't thank you enough, brother.
Oh, you're so welcome, man. This was fun. I'm so happy we got to do this.
Yeah. All right, man. Thanks again. We'll catch you down the road.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dave.
When I think of the beer that my dad drank growing up, my mind immediately goes to Heineken. Heineken was the imported beer that my dad and my uncles used as a status symbol. When they drank it, they felt like they were having the best time possible, regardless of how it tasted, because it did taste like garbage to me. But granted, I was a child, and of course, they would feed it to us because they thought it was funny, that we thought how bitter that was. Joke's on him. I'm now on beer Twitter. Hope you have a good Father's Day.
This is Leo Allen from Voluntary Input, a podcast which covers tech, TV, movies, and gaming, and everything in between. Simply go to voluntaryinput.com to find out all the ways you can subscribe, contact us, or better yet, register as a guest. We're always looking for great guests like you. First and foremost, thank you, Dave, for allowing me to share this special Father's Day memory of a beer my dad and my mom actually drank. For me, that beer is Wiedemann. It's the first beer I can recall ever seeing as a kid. German immigrant George Wiedemann began brewing Wiedemann's fine beer way back in 1870. That's when the original Wiedemann Brewing Company was founded in Newport, Kentucky, and enjoyed a long brewing history at 6th and Columbia Streets. George Wiedemann worked in brewing in New York, Louisville, and then Cincinnati, where he was brewmaster at Kaufman Brewery in Over the Rhine. He then moved to Newport, Kentucky, where he partnered with John Butcher at the Jackson Street Brewery. That's where Wiedemann's beer was born and the legend began. The Wiedemann family ran the business until the 1960s, when they sold it to Wisconsin-based Heilman Brewing Company. The Newport Brewery produced more than 1 million barrels of beer in a year, and at its height employed 800, but it closed in 1983. The Wiedemann name was sold again, and production moved to the Pittsburgh Brewing Company until 2007, when the name was dropped. But Wiedemann is back, thanks to John and Betsy Newberry, who resurrected the Wiedemann label in 2012 and established the Geo Wiedemann Brewing Company. The brewery is a full-scale tap house and restaurant located at 4811 Vine Street in Cincinnati, Ohio. For those familiar with the original Wiedemann beer, one memory that always comes to mind for me is my dad coming home from work carrying a box of those distinct, small, fat, brown 12-ounce bottles. My dad was a mill worker. He worked at a paper mill called Diamond International, later to become Smurfit International after a buyout, for his entire adult life, thus my entire life, up until his retirement and passing. But I'll never forget those little brown bottles on the table after he came home from work or during cookouts and other gatherings. Thanks again, Dave, for allowing me to share this memory and this beer. And a very special Happy Father's Day to dads everywhere.
I'd like to thank Dave for the absolute brilliance of this idea. I'm Chance from Strive Seek Find. And when I was thinking about beer my father drank when I was growing up, Miller Genuine Draft came to mind. And to find this beer around here in less than a 30-pack these days, it was a little bit of a chore. But probably for the first time in 25 years, I'm going to take a sip of one of these things tonight. Here we go. So, my father didn't drink a whole lot while I was growing up. You were a lot more likely to find a Coca-Cola in his hand at any given time of the day. Seriously, the man drank it for breakfast most days. But when he was cooking outside, the barbecue juice would flow ever so slightly. For perspective, Dad wouldn't take us camping when I was growing up. He stated he'd slept on the ground quite enough in Southeast Asia, and he'd sworn he'd never do it again. A vow he did manage to keep, but that didn't mean he didn't love being outside. By this time in my life, let's call me about 10, we were living back on the old family homestead, which had an old wagon road down to the creek where the original cabin had been. We had a little cook site under a tree, crabapple tree actually, close to the water. From his perch, he could see the kids playing in the water, playing in the mud, tubing, while he drank a Miller Genuine Draft and cooked some hamburgers and Dutch oven some potatoes. Dad would be on his lawn chair, MGD in hand, pouring it over the hamburgers whenever there was a flare-up, cooking and visiting. Every once in a while, he'd run out, you'd have to grab him another. Never more than 2. But this is when you'd get Dad his most verbose. He wasn't reading in a book or hustling to do something around the farm. It was truly family time. And we would try to do it until I went to work at about 14, 15, a couple of nights a week until it got too dry. And they were amazing conversations. I learned so much about the man. I can remember when my surrogate grandfather, Don, was there, and Don had been a belly gunner during the Second World War on a bomber, and Dad had been a Marine in Vietnam, and their discussion with me sitting there listening closely, sipping Coca-Cola while they both had a MGD, opened the world, is probably the best way to put it. I couldn't imagine what Don had gone through enclosed in that metal sphere, or what Dad had done in rice paddies. And they knew I was listening, but it was matter of fact, sharing, not attempting to explain so that you understood. They were having a conversation for them. And I could sit there and I could ask questions and they'd both share with me. But I learned more of their perspective of our country's history in those visits than I did through most of high school. It was incredible. All those times sitting by the creek, having whatever visit, and they had changed over time. It was time together, and it was time to visit, a time to know my father in a way I wouldn't at any other time of my life. So for a beer of my father, you can't go wrong with the Miller Genuine Draft, some Dutch oven potatoes, and a well-done cheeseburger. Thanks for letting me share this, Dave.
Hey, Dave. It's Lauren from the Beard Owl podcast. And when you asked about, wanting to hear from people talking about, their dads and beer, I felt instantly compelled to reach out to you because it's one of those things that I often say, my dad kind of made me the man that I am today. And, that's primarily, not primarily, but part of it is the whole craft beer thing. And I can't really say that there is one specific beer that I think about my dad with, and I think that speaks to his taste in beer, how it is wide and varied and, it runs deep. But mine didn't always do that. And when I think about my dad and beer, I think about gosh, Sunday dinner, when I used to go over to my parents' house and I'd walk in the door, I wouldn't even be in for like 30 seconds. And my dad would be coming at me, hand outstretched with a glass of beer. And 9 times out of 10 at that point, I was like, ugh, it just was not something that I was into. But he was like, no, try it. No, try it. No, just try it. And, every week it was, no, just try it. Just try it. Try this. And all of the trying really expanded my beer palate. And it's not something I would have tried on my own, but now I do. So thanks, Dad, for that. And, now I have become the person that does that for other people. I'll get a beer that, may be weird or maybe a style that, the people I'm hanging out with haven't had. And I'm like, no, but just try it. Just try it. And I think that's kind of my craft beer mantra. Like, the weirder it is, the more likely I want to try it. And that doesn't mean that I don't love the old, like, classic standby styles of beer, but give me weird. And, that's the whole Weird Al of it all, I guess. But anyway, thanks, Dave, for inviting people to talk about their dads and beer. And happy Father's Day to all of you. All right, bye.
All right, welcome back. You remember my next guest. I had him on last February or March, I believe. It's Jeremy Banas. Yeah. Jeremy's the author of such great books such as Celis Beer, Born in Belgium, Brewed in Texas, and is the host of a brand new podcast coming out today as we're recording. So I'll be checking that out as soon as we hang up. The podcast is called Cheers for Local Beers. Jeremy, thanks again. How's everything today?
We're doing pretty well. Excited about that podcast release and a little nervous about that podcast release as well.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned your father had a couple of beers that you remember him drinking.
Oh, yeah. Earliest memories was him, since we're from Colorado, drinking some Yellow Bellies back in the day quite a bit. But then, early teens and a little bit before that, you start hitting 10 or so. I really more remember him specifically drinking PBR and Stroh's.
PBR is all over the hipster beer now. Stroh's for me was hard to find. Have you had any of them recently?
So Pabst being back a thing because Pabst has been very, very smart with their marketing in the last 10 years, last 6 or 7 specifically, where they're taking what was your dad's beer or your grandpa's beer, and they are making it cool. Just like vinyl never really went away, almost went away. But for those of us who always had a turntable and never got rid of our vinyl, we're now suddenly hip because everybody's into vinyl again. Well, it's the same thing with Pabst, and half of its brands is they turned PBR into it's not just for your dad or your grandpa anymore kind of thing. And in a way, I think that's brilliant and it's fun and it's awesome because it keeps those heritage brands, the ones that are responsible business practices, not some of the other giant conglomerate owners, but it keeps some of these brands alive. And the beer, to answer your question finally, is actually everything I remember to always be.
Yeah.
And that is not great, but better than some of the other American adjunct lagers as far as Pabst goes, but still kind of good. It's a in the moment kind of thing. But I think a lot of times too, it's like, we want to knock a lot of these beers. Some of them are still pretty horrible. And then some of them are really, not so bad. And that would include the Stroh's.
Yeah, I wish, because PBR owns Stroh or Pabst owns Stroh's now. So I wish they would bring back the retro can, the retro look. But when I had it, doing the segment on my father, and I'm sure the recipe has changed over the last 40 years. But to me, as soon as I cracked that open, that just brought back, my father drinking this beer. The aroma to me was exactly the same. Like I said, I'm sure it's changed a little bit. It was still, a decent beer.
Well, it's like, living in Texas and then is still seeing a lot of Lone Star and a lot of Pearl. Lone Star, they're not trying to really do a hipster thing with the main Lone Star Pabst, but what they've done is they've come out with Lone Star Rio Jade, which is a different style of beer. Then they did one that was kind of a tart one. And then they've got a Lone Star brand seltzer. So Pabst, using the Lone Star brand, is trying to bring Lone Star back into, well, it's still very relevant in Texas and in a lot of areas because it's Lone Star beer, right?
Yeah.
But they're trying to find a different segment for Lone Star by finding some alternatives. And so Lone Star itself is still brewed up in Dallas at the Miller plant, but the smaller batch Lone Star stuff is being brewed up in Austin. So it's kind of interesting what Pabst has done in trying to revitalize these brands and maybe keep them going, including my beloved Pearl.
Yeah.
They took that Pearl away from being brewed up in Fort Worth with the most of their brands and contract with Miller. They contracted with a brewery up in Austin. I wish one in San Antonio where it was originally brewed, but they contracted with a brewery up in Austin to small batch brew Pearl. So Pearl has now become a much smaller brewed, more boutique kind of beer. And is it any better than it necessarily was? No, but it also was never really all that bad.
Yeah.
And now they're turning it into, like they have with Pabst itself, with PBR, they've turned Pearl into this kind of hipster light beer to drink that's been around for, 1886. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of interesting. I know we're delving away from the talking about what my dad did, but it's kind of like it's all these dad beers in general. So when somebody cracks open a Pearl and they talk to me about that book and they go, oh yeah, that was the first beer my dad ever had was a Pearl. Or I remember when my dad worked at Pearl and he'd bring his case of shift beers home once a week, and it's that every time I have a Pearl now, I remember my dad or my grandpa thing.
Yeah. My dad was all Stroh's. Once in a while, he would break out an old style, which was the big popular beer here. We were never a Bud town or a Miller town. It was an old style town. So once in a blue moon, once in a while, he would bring home an old style.
No beer pun intended.
Yes. But yeah, I would say 90%, 95% Stroh's. He was a Stroh's man, thick and thin.
Yeah, no, that's about right. Dad, I'd say probably had, I kind of want to say more equal on both. I think he went through phases where he might have bought more Stroh's or phases where he might have brought a little more Pabst. But of course, these days he will have a PBR just to spite me when we're out at a place and having a nice local beer, nothing with Fruit Loops in it and sugar and any of that. But I'm having a beer from a local brewery. He'll pull out that Pabst just to go, hey, look what I'm having. Like, I'm going to get upset. And I'm like, no, there's still a place for that.
Yeah.
There's absolutely a place for it. But yeah, he thinks it's funny to pull that out, considering these days it's Miller 64 I see in his fridge. And I'm like, dude, I said, just, go get the case of water for a 48 pack at Costco for $2.99 a water. And there is when you get down, this, you get in so few calories, so little malts being used. You're sacrificing so much flavor. It is almost like somebody took, you get those little drops of flavoring you can put in your bottle of water.
Yeah.
It doesn't have calories. It's almost like somebody did beer. You take just regular Pabst. It's it's still a beer. It's a light beer, but it still tastes like a beer. You get something down that low in calories, and most of the mass produced ones, it's like just drinking. It really is, jokes aside, and all of us snobby people, jokes aside, it's like drinking water. But that's what Dad's got in the fridge now is Miller 64. And I'm like, oh.
You're going to have to surprise him for Father's Day and throw in a 6-pack of Stroh's in there for him.
You know what? I'm going to have to.
What recollections or memories do you have of your father growing up and that beer, whether it's PBR or Stroh's? What comes to mind when, reminiscing about your father and beer growing up?
Well, I'd say a little bit it was, him coming home from work finally, and having a beer and sitting and watching TV and all of us being in there. But I'd say a lot of times it was we were either camping or going fishing, and him bringing that with him and drinking those while we were camping or fishing. Or actually, I need to throw in the hunting as well, which may or may not have been a good idea with the consuming beer in a firearm for abortion, but he more did that when we were fishing and hunting, and I have big memories over that. Well, and you wearing that Schlitz hat reminds me of my godparents, and they were always they went to school in Colorado but lived in Wisconsin and near Milwaukee, and they would always bring Schlitz in when they'd go home and come back. But then consequently, they would be taking Coors when it was only available in maybe 6 or 7 states. They'd be bringing Coors back to Wisconsin over their holidays. But that's another dad beer.
Yeah, I'm surprised no one's picked up Schlitz for this episode. But
you know what? If Schlitz was still readily available, I might have been having a Schlitz with you just out of
that's still a decent beer. I know they went back and they say they went to the original recipe.
That's what I heard.
But I'm looking at the ingredients. I did a segment on it last year. They're using Cascade hops. I'm like, well, that's not the original recipe then, because Cascade hops didn't come around really till the 70s.
Yeah, 70s. So it's hard to say unless they couldn't use whatever hops they were using. This is the closest to it. Hard to say, but it's like with Pearl. With Pearl now, it's the same recipe except that it's all grain.
Yeah,
and Pearl was an adjunct lager that had a corn element to it. I mean, it was a small corn element, but it was a corn element, and now it reminds you of Pearl. You know it's Pearl, but it's just a little differently. So I would imagine you mix up one little hop, even if the rest of that Schlitz recipe is the same.
Mm-hmm.
But one little, a little bit of Cascade is definitely going to bump up the hoppiness in there.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still a good beer. When I found it, I grabbed a 6-pack of it. The 6-pack of Tall Boys, I think, was $5. I'm like, oh, this is still a good lawnmower beer. It's 90 degrees outside. You're going to be on the grill. Just stand outside and have a couple of those.
Oh yeah, of course. My dad beer. That if one of my kids were doing a segment like this with one of their contemporaries in 20 years are probably going to say, well, what was the beer your dad had around all the time? And although, like I'm sure you do as well, I have a wide variety of beers from a lot of places I like. But if I have one beer is always in my fridge and is definitely the one that I will go to more than anything else, is a Hans Pils from Real Ale Brewing in Blanco.
Okay.
Based off of a specific brewery in Germany. So it's a little different even by German Pilsner standards. And then he amped up the hops a smidge on it. So even by a Pilsner standard, it's a little hoppier. But I'd say if my kids were doing this segment here in 20 years, that would be the one they probably bring up more than anything else.
Jeremy, I thank you so much for coming on again. Once again, you could get his books at runationpress.com. I'll put all this in the show notes. He has many good books. I've read Celis Beer, Born in Belgium, Brewed in Texas. Check out his new podcast, which is called Cheers for Local Beers. That's coming out today. We're recording this on May 30th. So when you hear this, I'm sure there'll be a couple episodes in the can. So check out Cheers for Local Beers. Jeremy, thanks again, sir. I appreciate you taking time out of your day.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to have on Pete Abada from the Middle Class Film Class podcast, and something with the podcast name. I drink beer, Pete. I don't know if I can pronounce Middle Class Film Class all the time without slurring, but
it's a little of a mouthful sometimes. The shorthand's MCFC. That's what we will shorthand it,
Looking at your stuff, you're pushing 200 episodes. You started in 2019. Yeah. Can you tell people a little bit about the podcast before we dive into the beer?
So there's 3 hosts, Joseph, Tyler, and myself. We're good friends in real life, and the show is about movies. And we all 3 of us are big movie fans. I watch way too many. I watched last year. I watched 525 movies last year, and this year I'm on track to do another 500. And we every Monday we do a weekly news review segment, which is like what's happening in Hollywood, what's new movies that are coming out, interesting projects we like from directors we are really passionate about, and then weird stories like Ezra Miller has been in like 10 fights in Hawaii in the last 2 months or whatever. So we'll talk about that and then we do streaming recommendations on the Monday show, and then on Wednesdays we do one like deep dive review into a movie that one of the three of us or a fan picks. So the cool thing about the show is versus take your pick of the other million movie shows you can listen to is we record it live to tape. So there's almost no editing. It's very casual. It's very natural because the three of us are friends in real life when we record right here together every week. All the music is put in live. All the sound segments and intros and stuff are done live. So it feels very, very much like you're kind of listening to a morning talk show.
Yeah, it's very good. After you reached out, I grabbed the last couple of episodes just to, kind of refresh myself, and it's a good show. So definitely,
thank you.
My fan stuff like that. If you're into movies, I would definitely recommend the Middle Class Film Class show, and I'll include the link in the show notes too. So,
I appreciate
you'll
that.
be able to grab it from there.
Yeah.
When you reached out, Pete, you said that you had a couple father figures that were more into the macros. What about those beers like resonate with you, and what kind of stories do you have about, the father figures in your life?
Yeah, so I really like the idea of this whole prompt, what your dad drank.
Yeah.
And my relationship with beer, obviously, as most people, when you're young, you hate it, you hate the taste of it. You eventually find a beer you like as you get older, and you're like, okay, well, this is my style. Well, my dad, he was never much of a drinker. He was he met my mom at Bible college. Never see him. I've never seen him really drink a hard liquor in his life. He's the type of guy that if you heard him cuss one time in his life, you're lucky, because he's just that type of wholesome guy. And his beer choice was always the Silver Bullet Coors Light.
All right.
And it was probably because it was A, tied to the Raiders, and he's a huge Raiders fan. And B, just it's an easy drinking beer. But he's a hard worker. I got my work ethic from him. So I'd see him. He literally built on like a 400 square foot addition to our house with just him and his friends, just on a whim. They're like, let's do it. Let's plan it out. I got a friend that owes me some concrete work. I got a friend that's a good drywaller. Let's get them together and make it happen. And he's the one who taught me just how good a cold beer is after a hot day outside.
Yeah.
And I never quite appreciated it until I started getting into automotive and auto body, which is what I do now. And, days when it's 110 outside and you're changing exhaust on your car because you don't have the money for a mechanic to change it, and you come out and you're covered in sweat and you're dripping and you're hot, a glass of water doesn't hit the same as a cold beer. Mm-hmm. I'm not a huge Coors Light fan, but whenever I drink it or have a friend that comes over to drink it, I'll save it for a hot day. And it reminds me of, my dad and that lesson and how true it is.
Now, you also mentioned another father figure that was into Budweiser, the original Budweiser, and Tecate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My Uncle John, he married into our family, and our families were, all the cousins we all lived in the houses about a 5-minute drive from each other. So
all right.
We essentially were raised as group families, either always at Lisa and John's house, my aunt and uncle, or at my house. And so Uncle John ended up becoming like a de facto father figure for me. And he wasn't into the light stuff. He liked the king of beers. He liked the red and whites, and he liked Tecate. And he was the person who showed me, I guess not showing me directly, but I would watch him cut the lime, squeeze the lime, put the salt inside, take a drink, and then what the difference was between uncut versus the Mexican beer style. There was a lot of great like afternoon barbecues and playing darts in the garage and playing basketball in the backyard. That was just Uncle John and Uncle Willie drinking their Tecates together. And
yeah,
you've been 8 years old and you're like, I want to take a sip, and you drink it. You're like, that's gross. And as an adult now, I've loved Tecate with the lime and the salt. Mm-hmm. And it just mainly because it just brings back that memory. But Mexican beers, it's weird. Mexican beers, it's I know it's there for a reason, but it almost feels like you're not doing it right unless you add the salt and the lime,
When, I drank, because I bought a 6-pack of the beer that my father drank, and it was weird. And I was wondering if, you feel the same way. Like when I cracked it open and poured it, that smell of that beer brought me back to when my father was drinking it. Like if you have a Tecate now with the lime and everything, just the aroma from that, bring back those memories for you.
Oh yeah. 100%. Scent is so strongly tied to that. It's like, you don't even have to taste it.
Yeah.
It's the theatrics of it. Just seeing a beer sitting there on next to the cutting board with a half a lime there and the salt shaker, you're just like, it just feels like transported back to that time, and it's a good time. So it makes me happy.
Well, Pete, those are great stories. Where can people find Middle Class Film Class?
I think that just head, whatever you're listening to this show right now, head to your podcast player that you're listening to this on, go to the search bar, type in Middle Class Film Class, and you'll see a little black and white icon. It's a super simple logo. It's a download it, listen to a few episodes of movies that you like from your past, or movies that you thought, oh, I've never heard anybody talk about this before, and give us a shot. If you like it, subscribe, and it's a good time.
Pete, I thank you, brother, for coming on. I appreciate it. Check out their show. I enjoy it. Pete, thanks again, brother. I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
You too, Dave. Thanks for having me on the show. It was really great digging up these memories.
Welcome back to the Father's Day episode of Beer in Front. I'm happy to have on famous author. She is the author of 14 books, has been in countless magazines like Forbes. I'm speaking to Jeanette Hurt. Jeanette, thank you so much for coming on. How are you today?
I am good, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, you are part of the Stroh's family here.
Yes,
who after I posted on social media, you were the only one who's like, I remember Stroh's. That was my father's beer as well.
It was my dad's beer. My dad loved drinking Stroh's. I mean, he didn't drink a lot, but when he did drink beer, it was Stroh's. Once in a while, it might have been old style or Hams, but it was Stroh's. And I remember anytime we had birthday parties or holidays, he'd pick up a couple of cases of Stroh's. And that's what everybody was drinking.
Have you had it recently, or is it just the memories that you have of the beer?
It's memories. I do remember it clearly. I have not had it recently, and it wasn't a beer in vogue when I became 21. It's something I remember viscerally. If I had a can of Stroh's here and opened it up, I would recognize the smell. I have a funny but true memory of Stroh's. It was back when I was about 10 years old, and it was some birthday party. I don't remember whose birthday party, or it might have been a 4th of July. It was some summer party, and my cousins and I were hanging out outside, but all of the adults had gone inside, which means they probably were eating or having dessert. But if you're a kid, you have 2 bites and then you run back outside to play. Oh, yeah. And my cousin George, who I thought was really cool, and he was the ringleader because he was a year older than me. He was 11. At some point he said, let's gather up all the cans. And so we did, because there were probably 20 or 30 cans of Stroh's just in the backyard. And he suggested we gather them up and then pour the remnants on top of my Uncle John's car. Now, my Uncle John, to give you a background, is a very nice man, but he also happens to be a Roman Catholic priest. So I don't know why George suggested this. I don't know why I or my sister Julie or his sister Barb decided, yeah, this is a great idea. But I remember we all gathered them up. I remember climbing on top of his sedan and pouring the beer on top. I remember George finding a can. He's like, this one is almost completely full, and poured it. But we poured every last drop of Stroh's onto Uncle John's blue sedan. And when Uncle John found this out, and now Uncle John was almost bald, but he was grabbing the remnants of his hair on both sides of his head, so angry. And then I remember getting yelled at by my dad and by his brother, George's dad, my Uncle George. It's like, George, Jeanette, we got in big trouble. That was one of the biggest, we got in a lot of trouble for that. And I'm pretty sure my dad had to then take a hose out to hose down Uncle John's car, because just can imagine him getting pulled over by the cop and it's smelling of saturated old Stroh's baked on.
I'm sure on a hot summer day. Yeah. Did you have to do some Hail Marys, confession after this, or how did that work out?
I
Okay.
know I was sent to my room, and
Okay.
I know we were in big trouble, and George and Barb had to leave the party pretty soon after, and I remember they were really mad at us. And it's one of those cases also, anytime you leave the kids alone and they're too quiet, they're usually getting into trouble. We definitely they were none too pleased with us.
Before we went on the air, you were mentioning that your father has graduated from Stroh's. What is
Yes,
he?
he has. It's funny because that's what he drank when I was growing up. But then, like so many people, he got into a little bit more into craft beer, but mostly what he's gotten into is imports.
Okay.
And he prefers Pilsner Urquell, and then I would say Guinness. I remember going on a trip with him. It was a train trip through Ireland because he loves trains and so does my son. And my dad's favorite thing about it is the Guinness car, where you could get pretty much all the Guinness you could drink, which was pretty cool. And he loves Guinness, but he really loves Pilsner Urquell. Part of that is because he is Czech. And he got to go to Prague and visit where it was made. And he was thrilled. So that's what he drinks now. And he also, when he doesn't drink beer, he drinks more wine now.
Okay.
So he's graduated on, but growing up, it was Stroh's. And then when we were with my grandparents, they would have Southern Comfort Manhattans. That was their big thing.
Yeah. Is this what started you? Some of the books you mentioned, Manhattan's just now. One of the books that you've written is called Wisconsin Cocktails. Is that what started you into writing about alcohol or not?
Well, part of it, I guess I'll say, I remember growing up, and I now live in Milwaukee, but I remember as a kid going on vacation to Wisconsin and to upstate New York, where some of my dad's other relatives live. And I remember asking my mom, is there anything made in factories besides beer and wine? In which case, the next vacation we went on, my mom made sure we visited a candy factory to show us that, yes, there's things more than beer and wine. But I do think those things kind of resonate in you. And I was a food writer. And if you become a food writer, then you get into wine pairings and beer pairings if you go to restaurants that do those kinds of dinners. And that led me into my first book on beverages, which was The Complete Idiot's Guide to Wine and Food Pairing, because I just wanted to know how you do it. And it was actually writing about wine that led me into cocktails, because Guy Rehorst opened up the first distillery in Wisconsin since Prohibition, which is Great Lakes Distillery.
Okay.
And so I started actually writing about the distillery for wine publications. And once you start writing, though, about distilleries, then you get into cocktails. And for me, it's kind of like, well, I want to learn how to make them. I want to know more. So I go down, it's like any subject that I'm mostly interested in, I'll go down these rabbit holes. And that's kind of been sort of my guiding way of how I follow what I'm going to write about.
Some of the other books you've written, there's one, Drink Like a Woman and The Joy of Cider. Obviously, yeah. I could pretty much put two and two together and figure out what The Joy of Cider is about. But what is Drink Like a Woman about?
Well, Drink Like a Woman is a pop culture book which combines recipes and the history of women in cocktails, which is also the history of women in drinking. And to bring it back to beer, way back in ancient Mesopotamia, women were the people who would brew beer. And it was, in fact, a Sumerian goddess who is the goddess of beer. And then if you go through the history, women, like, for example, again, with beer, way back in, I want to say, I think it was the 17 or 1800s, there were alewives, but the best way and they brewed beer until their competition, who were men, would accuse them of witchcraft. What's the better way to run a woman out of business? Accuse her of being a witch. So it's kind of, you go into that sort of history. In cocktails, what I found really interesting is it's very likely that an American woman named Catherine Hustler may have invented the cocktail during the American Revolution. And basically, she had a tavern called Hustler's Tavern. And this is after the war. But during the war, she was a sutler, which meant she outfit our troops with booze because you needed booze to fight. And then during the War of 1812, her tavern was the only tavern in Lewiston, New York, that wasn't burned down because she served our soldiers and the English soldiers. She was an equal opportunist, a smart entrepreneur. And then later on, there was a certain American author, James Fenimore Cooper, who was working on his second book. And he included a character whom he named Elizabeth Betty Flanagan, who he credited with creating the drink we know so well, the cocktail. And what we know about James Fenimore Cooper is he would base these characters in his books that were based on real people. And I think it's a possibility. I mean, it could be that it was invented in England or New Orleans, but the earliest reference to a cocktail in print was in a New England newspaper. So I like to think that Catherine Hustler was the inventor of it.
Are these books, are all of your books, are they available at like your Amazons, Barnes and Noble?
Barnes and Noble, any place that books are sold, you can buy them. And if they don't have it, you can order them. They're in stock. They're in print.
Now, your website is JeanetteHurt.com. Can people buy your books there if they just want to go to your website?
You can go to the website, but I don't sell them directly.
Okay.
But if you want an autographed copy, feel free to email me and we can set up something if there's a book you're dying to have autographed and sent.
Jeanette, I really thank you. It's been great talking to you about Stroh's. I hope Uncle John's car finally got clean. Yeah. You should pick up some Stroh's for Father's Day. Right. Yes.
I think for Father's Day, we definitely should pick up some Stroh's, and I'll open it up with my sisters and see if we still have an urge to go and pour it on somebody's car.
Yeah. All right. Jeanette, thank you again. Please check out her website at JeanetteHurt.com. Like I said, there's 14 books, countless magazines like Forbes, things like that. Jeanette, thank you again. I do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It's been a lot of fun.
So I want to talk about a dad beer that at the time was not a typical dad beer, but it really led me into being the adventurous beer drinker that I am today. So back in the late 70s, early 80s in Rochester, New York, where I grew up, Genesee products were king. Jenny Light, and the infamous Jenny Cream Ale, or Jenny Screamers as they were known. They were the staple in all of our dad's beer fridges, whether that was the garage fridge or the basement fridge. They were all stocked with Jenny. There were certainly some Bud and Miller fans around, but Jenny was really on draft everywhere. It was in every house. That was what you knew you were going to have when you arrived at a party. So it was in every house except mine. My dad was really involved in auto racing at the time, and as a result, he traveled all over the Northeast and Canada to work as a flagger at racetracks. Formula One, kart, Indy cars, you name it, he was there. And as a result, he got exposed to a lot of what were then just called imports. Moosehead, Molson, and his favorite, which became Labatt Blue. He had a smattering of European, mostly German beers that made their way into his stomach through other connections at the track. But Labatt Blue was really his staple. So fast forward a little bit to the late 80s, and my brother and I and our collective friends are stealing beers from our dads, as you do. And at my house, we had the fancy beers. And weirdly enough, in the little town I grew up in, the combination of imported beer and the fact that my parents both drove Volvos, because my dad worked at a Volvo dealership, had us labeled as fancy. It was never really a big deal, but it kind of stuck. Because my dad was the local beer snob with his fancy Labatt Blue, it actually led him to branching out even more as more beers became available on the market and access to imports increased. Add to that, we had both a German foreign exchange student and a Swedish foreign exchange student that stayed with us when I was a teen, 14 to 16 or so. And we became close enough with their families that we went to Germany and Sweden when I was 16. And I really got my eyes open to the world of beer at that point. First time I had ever had a Hefeweizen was on that trip. So really, pretty amazing experience. A little bit later, we had a brew pub that opened in a hotel not too far from home. The type of place, little tiny brew system. They brewed 1 or 2 products to serve on draft. But most of it was just there for show. It was neat to see the kettles and the louder tons and the mash tons. And it's where I learned some of that language early on. But they had a lot of other European beers on tap, stuff like John Courage and Boddington's and Newcastle and things like that, which he really enjoyed. And he'd share with my brother and I when we were out to dinner or having beers, even though we were a little underage. And we went to the place often enough that as we got a little older, my friends and I, at 19 or so, we could walk into the place and drink underage because not only were we kind of regulars, no kid in their right mind was walking into a brew pub in a hotel and ordering a somewhat obscure to us, English or German beer. And if I look back, those early days of exploring beer are what led me to being open to so many new styles and turning into the beer geek that I am today. It's really hard to believe that what is now definitively a dad beer was so fancy at the time that it opened the door to him and brought us to all the non-dad beers of the world that I really now enjoy. So I owe my dad a debt of gratitude for that, for opening my eyes, even inadvertently, to what could be in the world of beer because of his fancy choices from the racetrack. So thanks, Dad. Happy Father's Day.
Hi there. My name is Kevin. I live in Wisconsin. Not from Wisconsin originally. I grew up just outside of Edinburgh, Scotland. My mum's favourite beer was a British beer or Scottish beer called Sweetheart Stout, made by Tennant. Some of you might have heard of Tennant's. It's a extremely low ABV milk stout, very, very sweet. A little like a barley wine in taste without that huge alcohol content. So we moved to Wisconsin about 6 years ago. My mum comes to visit us. I take her to my favourite local craft beer place. Huge shout out to Pepe's in Racine for their fantastic staff and amazing selection. She winds up with a 14% barley wine. Absolutely loves it. Down it goes very, very quickly, and she's off to get another one. Let's just say that walk back to her apartment wasn't very far, but it was interesting. When she was growing up, her dad would be my granddad, worked in breweries in Edinburgh. So that's where I guess I get my love of beer from. He would bring home some kind of leftover product, and they called it pundy. I don't know what that is. It was dark. She said it had a higher alcohol content. I don't necessarily know. I want to know what it was. But she was renowned for stealing it as a youngster. Maybe that's where she gets her taste for that as well. These days, she has discovered coffee stouts, which she loves. She loves pastry stouts. Being Scottish, though, she doesn't buy them. She just waits for her sons, me and my brother, to buy them for her so she can enjoy them. Hey, thanks for listening to my beer story, everyone.
Hey, it's Joey from the Good People, Cool Things and Sports Are Dumb podcasts. I don't really remember my parents drinking a particular beer growing up, but I do remember it being a common presence throughout the household. And I don't say that in the sense of my dad was always holding a bottle or a goblet of beer or anything like that, but just that there was always at least like a little bit stocked if they were ever entertaining friends or family and wanted to have some on hand. I do remember Goose Island growing up in Chicago. That was always a beer that I thought was a cool name. I thought Goose Island was just such a fun name, even before I had ever tried it myself. And that was kind of a staple. I remember seeing that at my uncle's house as well when we would go over there to celebrate things like 4th of July or Christmas or any kind of other holiday or birthday or anything like that. But more than the particular beer, I remember the glasses that we would drink out of. And I know for people that are way more intelligent about beer than me, they will swear by the different glasses for the types of drinks that you're having. You've probably seen this if you ever go out to drink, that you order one beer, you get it in a certain style of glass. You order another, you might get it in another style. I never really understood that growing up. I just thought, hey, whatever glass is available, let's go for it. But my parents would always kind of have a big old goblet style of glass that they would drink their beer out of. If they were having wine, obviously a wine glass. If they were having some sort of cocktail, my dad is a huge Manhattan fan, so he will pour those in more of a cocktail glass. But I remember these kind of like giant sort of goblets that weren't fancy. They were glass, but it just sticks in my memory of, regardless of what the beer was, if there was a beer, it was that. And sometimes I'd even get to pour it. I wasn't drinking beer. I was 10. What was I going to do? I'm not going to take a sip of the beer, but I'd get to pour out the bottle, out the can into this goblet. And it felt almost a little bit like royalty, even though it certainly wasn't. I'm sure it was a set of 4 glasses for $10 or something like that. And then I had my own glass that I would put water or milk or pop or whatever I was drinking. I would use my own glass for that. And those glasses were not goblets, but in fact, they were a collection, which I believe was from Burger King. It was part of a promotion where they gave you these glasses that had different Disney movies on them. And on the front, they'd have a picture of the Lion King poster or the Jungle Book, and then on the back, they would have a description of the movie. So I remember reading about Simba and Mowgli, and I had seen the movies too, but I was like, hey, I like this little summary, and that was always kind of a fun thing to read on the back of a glass while my parents were enjoying a beer next to me. I'd be sipping on my milk, reading about how Simba had to take over the kingdom and avenge his father's death, and that's kind of heavy stuff for a child, isn't it? And bringing it back full circle, the city that I grew up in, it's a suburb of Chicago, and it just got its first brewery last year. And I went to visit my parents. We went to this brewery. I got a little flight, and they gave me my 3 drinks. They were all in mini goblets, and it took me right back to being at home. I'm sure these glasses are probably a little fancier than the ones that we were drinking of, but it was such a nostalgia rush to come all the way back to me. And here I was now as an adult in his 30s, able to have a drink with my parents. And it was super cool. It was very nostalgic. The only thing missing was a summary of the Jungle Book, but we're sitting outside having a great time, enjoying each other's company and living in the city that they still live in, that I grew up in. And I mean, if that doesn't beat nostalgia, I don't know what does. So a very happy Father's Day to all of the dads, grandpas, great-grandpas, all of you out there. You're doing a wonderful job. Keep it up, and happy drinking.
Hey, Dave, it's your boy Heath from E14 Podcast. Today, we're celebrating Father's Day, and I'd like to give a shout out to my dad, William Britt, who's no longer with us, but great human being, great dad, great father, great husband, just all around perfect guy. But he didn't drink a lot. But when he did, he liked to kick back and have him a Budweiser or 2. And that's what I'm drinking today. Not a fan of Budweiser. But for him, I'll drink a few. Here, I'm going to take a sip. But yeah, just as great as he was, he had the hands of steel. So I felt those hands of steel on my rear end when I screwed up as a kid. And he always had a way to get his point across, if you know what I mean. But Dad, you're the best, and I miss you and love you so much, and happy Father's Day.
Hello, everybody. It's Uncle Dub, and I thank Dave for allowing me to take a couple minutes to talk about dad beers. And for me, the fondest memory I have of my dad and beer. So my dad is, old school guy. He's, drank a lot of beer in his life. I try to introduce him to craft beer every now and then. And he likes a few things. Some things he just wants it simple. And I understand it. I'm sort of getting like that too in my advancing age. But the memory I have that sticks in my mind is, growing up, I lived very close to my dad's brother. So they're, very close in proximity. And just about every holiday, in summertime. So you have Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, and birthdays and stuff like that. He always had a big cookout at his house. And Miller High Life was the beer of choice. Now, I think I remember some other beers, but I think what sticks out in my mind as far as that particular beer is the bottle. So it's a clear bottle, and you see the liquid in the bottle, and just about everybody has one. And this is a period of time where, most people smoked, and, I think my dad was probably still smoking at the time. But just seeing that and, the smell, as a kid, you don't know what you're smelling, you're smelling the alcohol, and it's kind of different, but weird, but, kind of in that era, you just knew you weren't supposed to be drinking those sorts of things. But, at some point, and I think I was a little bit older, either, my dad or my uncle's like, you want to try it? It's like, sure, whatever. And, it wasn't all that great, but nevertheless, over time, I developed my own palate, and I think I went through my own phases of, drinking all the, the beer that most people drank, your Budweiser, your Miller, all that stuff, Miller Lite, Miller Genuine Draft came out, in the 90s, and that was the beer, at least to sort of be in the same category as Miller High Life, but nothing beat it. And I find myself as an adult from time to time, I think I drink my fair share of craft beers. I'm, not seeking out IPAs the way I used to, because they're triple hopping them and dry hopping them, and all those hops are a little hard on the old guy. But every now and then, when I'm thinking I don't want a craft beer, I just want something simple, I just want something that's light, I will go get Miller High Life. And I remember one New Year's, I didn't want anything extravagant. I was in the basement fixing some stuff, and we were prepping the house to celebrate New Year's, and I went on to run a couple errands, and I came back with a case of Miller High Life, and that's how I spent that New Year's Eve, drinking High Life, and then of course having champagne at midnight. But how interesting though, it is called the champagne of beers. So again, I had a lot of champagne at night in beer form and in regular form, and it kind of made me think about how life comes full circle. And I'm, just in awe of just how just the circle of life works. And so, Miller High Life has kind of been in my memory for a very long time. And again, it reminds me of my dad. A lot of things remind me of my dad, but that does. So with that said, I thank you, Dave, for allowing me to, give this brief few minutes about dad beers, what I remember. And I want to say happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. And I hope you're having a great day, and enjoy the rest of the show.
All right, welcome back on this Father's Day edition. I'm happy to have back on the show my friends from the fabulous Weekly Beer Show, Nate and Danny. Guys, welcome back. Thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, well, all right.
Yeah, what's up, Dave?
Nothing. Yeah, nice talking to you guys again. Yeah, you could check out their show every weekend over on YouTube. Follow them on Twitter at Weekly Beer Show, Instagram, all of that. It's Father's Day, so let's talk about some old man beers. What do you guys have with us today? And can you give me some stories about your old man and beer and what you remember about him?
All right, well, my old man is definitely fits in the beer category. He is Homer Simpson without the dumbness, like my dad always has a beer and a cigarette to go along with it. I'm drinking his favorite beer. The beer that I knew that he grew up with is Labatt Blue, and it's from Canada. He's, we grew up in Buffalo, so right over the border, we all drink either Molson or Blue as our regular beer. And they don't drink his other beer, Old Milwaukee. They don't even make it anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think they made like that NA for a while, but I couldn't tell you the last time I saw like just regular Old Milwaukee.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story real quick, Dave. I saw the NA and I didn't realize it, and I saw it and I was like, oh my God, Old Milwaukee. I grabbed it. I was like, and they even rebranded it. Yeah. They put this girl on there. I got home and I'm like, it just looks weird. And I started reading it. It said non-alcoholic.
What do you have over there, Nate?
Yeah, so I thought, Dave, I thought long and hard about this. I really wanted to kind of take the spirit of Father's Day and kind of think back to my past. And my stepfather was a truck driver when I was growing up. He was a Bud Heavy man. He was a Banquet Beers man. Red Wolf, Red Dog, which I believe are no longer in production. But the one thing that actually stuck out to me and wanted to share was
because of the new craft beer scene and how easily accessible beer all around the world is, my first glimpse of not domestic beer, but imported beer was Foster's from Australia. And that's the thing that he reminds me of when I think back to those times, even though actually I've been to Australia once and they actually don't drink Foster's down there, believe it or not. But that is my first taste of international beer, Foster's.
Well, I see both of you have them open there. So when was the last time you each had this beer?
Well, for me, I drink it every time I go home to Buffalo.
All right.
Yeah, so it's still in existence. And my dad compares everything to a 30-pack of Labatt Blue. So, like, if he's out drinking at a craft beer place or whatever, he'll be like, these damn beers. Oh, man, I could have bought 3 30-packs for the cost of this. It always comes back to that. Well, yeah, I still a couple months.
Yeah, I'd say for me, for Foster's, it's probably back when I was in college.
All right.
Foster's kind of, it was super popular back in the late 80s, early 90s, and then it just kind of died off. You remember? I remember all the commercials back then, but I want to say probably late 90s, super early 2000s, and this is the first time I've had it since then.
What do you think of it? Does it bring back like any memories, the aroma of it? Like when I had the Strohs for my old man, when I cracked open, I'm like, man, shit, it brought me right back to the early 80s. Just the smell was like, oh, yeah, that's a Strohs.
Yeah, so there's definitely a worker man smell to this beer, and that's who he was. It kind of reminds me of we used to grease the truck. He used to have us grease the fifth wheel and do all that kind of stuff. That's what this reminds me of for some reason. The smell, it smells like that. It smells like my stepfather. So the taste, I don't know. It tastes like a typical lager.
Yeah,
typical
macro lager.
Yeah. My father has burped so many times in my face or in the proximity of my face, so I always smell his like beer breath, even since I was a kid, man. So and I got pictures to prove that, but just it reminds me of, because obviously this then was this one that I started experimenting on. If you've ever dry heaved as a kid off of beer, you'll never forget that flavor, Yeah. Typically for liquor, I think you quit that liquor. Like I can't go, near Captain Morgan.
Southern Comfort.
Yeah, Southern Comfort's the same with me. Southern Comfort.
That one got me.
It's a twist of vanilla, right?
Yeah. Cherry or whatever that is.
But the beer seems to always bring back those good memories of like burping and like dry heaving type stuff.
Or like, you mentioned your old man with the cigarettes. Mine was too. And then like every now and then he'd grab the can with the cigarette butt in it. And it's just like, oh shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Do you guys, speaking of old man beers or older beers, there's a couple I wanted to bring up. Have you ever heard of OV?
No, I don't.
No, I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
OV is called Old Vienna. It was big in Buffalo. I don't know if it was a Canadian beer or a beer that sometimes is around the lakes through Pittsburgh or Cleveland or whatever. But I drank it up until I was 20-something years old. And they used to do the pony, the little 7-ounce bottles.
Oh, okay.
And you'd go to a bar and you get a couple of guys and you have a boat race. But they just lay the ice on it. And it came in OV, Rolling Rock, and Miller High Life.
We used to do the Rolling Rock.
Yeah.
The 7-ounce pony bottles, case races.
Schmitz. Anyone remember Schmitz?
Yeah, I remember Schmitz.
Where was Schmitz made? Was that over by you in Chicago, Dave?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen that. I remember that as a kid because I used to have like a beer can collection and I remember having it, but I haven't seen it as an adult.
It's Philadelphia.
Oh, really? Philly.
Yep. That's another one that kind of Yuengling was another one of the big ones growing up in Pennsylvania. Every barbecue, every birthday party was out back in an above ground pool with a keg of Yuengling and a keg of birch beer for the kids.
Yeah, I talked to a guy yesterday, Floyd from Philadelphia. He sent over a Yuengling, so we were having that and talking about like his old man drinking Yuenglings all the time.
Great beer, beer.
That's awesome. Do you guys remember Narragansett?
Yeah.
Ooh, I never heard of that.
Narragansett is making a comeback, I think, Dave. I think they're rebranded. For us, it didn't even come in a box. It just came with the little plastic and it was a gold can.
Yeah. Like even now, like, you get the Memorial Day, Father's Day sales. Like I remember Memorial Day, they had by me a case of a 30 pack of the High Life was $9.99. I'm like, for $10, yeah. You cook brats with it. Yeah. It's hot. You just want to pound one down. I'll buy a 30 pack for $10.
We used to put the beer in the sauerkraut and just throw like kielbasa in there and just man, I miss those days.
That's the champagne of beers, Dave. You don't want to go mess with my favorite. That one's a good one. Where's my little sign? I got a Miller High Life sign. We're around here. But so you're drinking Stroh's then, Dave?
Yeah, I'm drinking Stroh. That was my father's beer, so that's what I'm going to talk about on the show. Yeah.
Hey, the one thing that's crazy about Labatt Blue is like Labatt Blue, you can get here Labatt Blue Light. When you get into Buffalo, Molson, same thing. You can get like Molson Canadian, a few other flavors. But when you go to Canada and you go to the beer store, oh my gosh, there's like, they got like Molson and Labatt malt liquor. They got stuff called 50-50 where it's a lager and a Pilsner. They got all the, they got
Triple X.
Yeah. Triple X was like a 11%er. And, they got like 30 different brands of Labatt Blue. It's awesome.
Real quick, because both of you guys have imported beers.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was growing up, and you're both a little bit younger, but the stigma was, and especially with the Canadian beers, I have to have a Canadian beer. It's stronger than a U.S. beer, even though if you look at it, it's the same ABV, but like there was always this stigma that the imports, whether it was a Labatt's or Molson or a Foster's or Heineken or anything like that. Did you have that stigma growing up that, I need to have an import because this is a better, stronger beer?
We didn't really, Dave, because it was so accessible. I mean, being right across the street, I mean, literally across the river from Canada. It was just accepted. And then not only just with Labatt Blue and Molson Canadian and Golden, is with the whiskey. Like Buffalo is a huge Crown Royal town. Like it's they love Canadian whiskey, and so we never really had that. I don't know if Nate you had that.
No, it wasn't about the ABV that stood out. It was about price. You know, like imported beers back then were absolutely more expensive compared to their American counterparts. And now it's kind of the playing field's been leveled, in my opinion. So it really wasn't about ABV, but I didn't really think about that back then. It might have been what my stepfather thought of and what his friends thought of, but not for me at that age. No.
Did you ever have Genesee or Utica Blue?
I never had Utica, but I've had Jenny's before. Yeah.
Jenny's were good, man. And remember, we used to get, like, me and Dave talked about this. My dad and my family would get like a wooden crate. The thing was like, it was like carrying a plate of, out of the weightlifting gym. And it had these big 16-ounce glass of bottles. And when we were done, you'd return them. And then they would fill them up somehow, some way. They would go back to the, distributor and they would wash them and fill them up. I just remember that. And I remember the cans were like, you remember like the 6 or 7 ounce cans of like juice and pineapple?
Yeah.
Back to foil. The beer cans used to be like that.
Yeah.
It was like a really weird mouth. Like it's so much better now, right?
Yeah. You'd be, stepping on them at the beach and cutting your foot open at the beach with those little pull tabs back then. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and talking about your old man beers. Once again, you could check them out every weekend on YouTube. The Weekly Beer Show, phenomenal show. I tune in every time I get a weekend day off. I always try to tune in. If not, I'll watch it, later, a couple days later. If you miss a show, you're working weekends like I do, you could always go back and, watch the show a couple days later. Nate, Danny, thanks again for coming on, guys. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Thank you so much. And we got to say right back at you, we really appreciate you showing up and watching our show. And we are out here supporting you, whatever you're doing. Keep doing it. We love watching it and listening to it. And so it's great to be part of this community. Thank you for having us.
All right. Anytime, guys. Cheers. We'll catch you down the road.
Happy
Your
Father's
dad.
Day, guys. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day.
Happy Dad's Day.
Cheers.
I want to thank everyone that sent in a clip or had me interview them for this Father's Day episode. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. I know you're all looking at your watch going, shit, Dave, your shows are 20 minutes long and we're an hour and a half into this. So I'm going to start wrapping things up. I'm going to talk about a couple of beers and a couple of gentlemen that were very important to me, my father and my Uncle Pete. If you're a longtime listener of the show, you've heard me talk about it. You know, I've been looking for this for a while. I finally found it. So I'm going to crack open a Stroh's and have this one for my old man. Yeah, the color is great. I don't remember the color because my old man wasn't a pour it into a glass kind of guy. He just drank it out of the beer can. But the color is a really nice golden color. Man, the smell really brings me back. Brings me back to, you know, my parents were divorced. So, you know, my father had custody every other weekends and holidays. So the smell of this brings me back to like weekends with my father. Trying not to get too choked up about it. My old man died in 95, but, you know, I remember, you know, going over to his house on, you know, those weekends. He would always have Stroh's with him. You know, he would drink Stroh's. We would watch Saturday night TV, which back then was CBS. You had The Muppet Show. Like Carol Burnett was on. I remember Bob Newhart. I'm sure there were others, but those were the ones that I remember, and I remember to this day. And like all of that is like coming back to me just from the smell. I haven't even tasted the beer yet. Yeah. I mean, I didn't drink a lot of it then. I'm sure I snuck a sip here and there, but yeah, this is a really good, solid, you know, old man macro beer. I could definitely, you know, if I were to ever find this again, I would buy more of them. I would have this. This is a solid beer. I don't know. I'm sure the recipe's changed. The brewery has changed hands. It's now run by Pabst. So, yeah, it's brewed in Milwaukee, not Detroit anymore. I know they have a Michigan-only one that maybe that's closer to the original, but just for a basic, like I said, old man beer, lawnmower beer, you can't go wrong with Stroh's. So, Dad, I miss you. I'm glad I finally was able to find this beer. I miss you, Dad. Happy Father's Day. Another one I want to talk about is Old Style. I had a full show on this last year, but another father figure to me was Uncle Pete. Everyone called him Uncle Pete, but he really was like my grandfather. And he wasn't a big beer drinker, but I always remember when he did, it was Old Style. And I always remember, like, he would maybe only have it for the holidays. It was very rare to see him have an Old Style if it wasn't Thanksgiving, Christmas, you know, something like that. But he always had beer mugs in the freezer, and he had these stainless steel. I think he had one glass one too, but he always had to have it in a frosted mug. So while my mug is not frosted, Uncle Pete, I'm going to crack open an Old Style for you. You know, like I mentioned with Stroh's, just the smell, the aroma, this really brings me back to, you know, being a teenager and smelling this beer. Yeah, Old Style, it's not a bad macro. I've had worse macros than Old Style. So if you're in the Chicago area or Wisconsin area, I think that's probably the only places you could really find it. but they've gone back to the retro can. No more of this fancy shit that they had back in the 90s. Although it was good when they had the TV commercials with Dennis Farina. But no, they've gone back to the old style can. Still a solid beer. Uncle Pete, here's to you. Oh, I thank you so much for listening to this Father's Day edition of Beer in Front. And I want to thank once again everyone that participated in this. This was a lot of fun putting together. I hope you had as much fun listening to it as I did hearing all of these great stories. Thank you again to everyone. Next week is a good show. I talked to the guys over at Old Irving Brewing Company. I'm going to talk to them and have that out on next week's show. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to have Jason on from the Designated Quizzers podcast. You've heard Brian on before from the Great Playlist Wars podcast. I was on their show before. I recorded a segment for an upcoming podcast that they're having. That's going to be a great one. It's all about album openers. I'll be sure to give that info when that show drops. So a lot of good things happening. Thanks again for listening. To all the fathers out there, happy Father's Day. We'll see everyone next week.